In today's video, I'm going to be breaking down the most important champion select fundamentals to increase your win rate in solo queue. And I'm not going to be like every other coach that I had throughout my playing career and make you play Azir, Ornn, Braum, front to back comp, anything boring like that. We're going to be talking strictly solo queue, how to min-max from champ select to increase your win rate in a solo queue setting. Starting off with the pick order, and the objective best pick order by far, I'm not going to take any arguments to this, is top lane being last pick of course, mid picking second to last. These are the two most important. Then support and jungle can go either way, and AD carry picking first is the best pick order. And even on blue side, as a top lane or mid lane, you often want to be picking as late as possible. But you might be thinking like, why is that? I'm going to be blind picking anyway. But there's a massive difference picking 3, 4, 5 compared to picking 1, 2, or 3. And the reason for that is, not only do you see 4 of the enemy champions, which can allow you to pick a really high impact champion, even if your matchup is not that good, but also if you pick really early, sometimes you can ruin your mid laner's matchup as well. Because if you pick 2, 3 on blue, then they can counter pick top and last pick mid as well. So they get winning top and mid matchup double winning solo lanes. So you can grief your mid laner, but also you're going to be griefing yourself in the same time, because you're not going to be able to see as many champions as possible and give yourself the highest chance of being extremely impactful in that game. Now, as for picking your champion, there are 3 main points you need to be looking out for. The first one is of course always going to be your matchup, but if you can pick a champion that wins lane but also outscales your opponent in side lane, your impact is going to be extremely high. Now, let's assume you're blind picking. The second most important priority is the enemy jungle interaction. So if you can pick a champion that interacts well in a skirmish against their jungler, your impact's going to be high in that game even if your matchup's not that good. So an easy example would be if you pick Jax because you see a Kindred or a Viego jungle, even if your matchup sucks, your value in that game is still going to be decently high. But if you pick Jax blind pick and they have Poppy jungle or like a Zyra, and then you get countered by like a Kennen on top of that, your impact's going to be extremely low. So making sure you're picking into your matchup and the jungler if you can, or just at least one if you're blind picking. Now the third most important priority is the enemy carry, so they're mid and AD. So you don't want to really overwhelm your mental stack, just mainly focus on the top 2. But an example of picking a champion that does well into their carriers would be if they pick Azir and Jinx or Azir and Xayah, something like that. A lot of disengage and a lot of sustained damage. If you pick a champion that outranges them, like a Jace or like a Gangplank, your value is going to be quite high compared to picking a Jason to maybe Kai'Sa AD carry with like a diving mid like a Kali or something like that. Your impact's not going to be as good. And another example would be, let's say they have champions that go in. Let's say they have that Kai'Sa comp we just talked about, like Kai'Sa or Kali. Renekton would go extremely hard in that game. Even if you had to verse like a Nara or a Jace top matchup top, that's quite difficult. You're still going to be extremely impactful because of the way your champion skirmishes into the main players on their comp, their main carriers. But of course, because early game is just so important in League at the moment, mainly pick around top and jungle. So let's go through some strong examples of ways that you can be utilizing not only counter pick and solo queue, but blind pick as well to increase your impact in that game. So starting off with our counter pick examples, let's say you're picking last pick on red side and you see them blind pick Camille. There are a bunch of different champions you could go. You could go Renekton, you could go Poppy, you could go Jax, but let's say they have Camille and Viego, an auto take based jungler. In that case, Jax is going to outperform the other 2 champions, assuming you play them all to a similar level. You're going to be able to counter the Camille in lane, of course, like you would on all 3 options, but you're also going to counter the Viego jungle in top 2v2s, side laning, team fights as well. So Jax would be a much higher impact pick in that game. But let's swap out one piece of the puzzle. Let's swap out the Viego for a champion like Zac. In that case, Poppy is actually going to outperform, because again, you're still going to win your matchup if you play it to a good level, but you're going to completely counter the enemy top and jungle throughout the rest of the game, so your impact would be a lot higher. But let's give a more difficult example. Let's say you're playing up against an Aatrox, and they pick some tanky meatball jungle like a Skarner or like a Sejuani that has to run towards you and engage, and your options to pick into Aatrox, champ you like to play. Let's say we have Jace, we have Gwen, and we have Camille. Of course, seeing their top jungle, Gwen is going to be the best performer in this game. She does really well into their meatball style, so you want to be prioritizing Gwen in that game. But again, if we swap out one piece of the puzzle, let's swap out the jungle for a champion like Talia or a champion like Lilia or Zyra that doesn't really come towards you, they play that range, then Jace is actually going to be the best pick in that game. And for our final example, for counter picking, let's say they go Jax and then a strong range jungler like Zyra, and you've got the option of Cassante, you could go Garen, you could go Jace. Jace will win the lane top, and Jace will also do very well into their range jungle style, outranging them, poking them down to low HP, and not having to fully commit like our other 2 options would have to. But if we swap that out for a Nocturne, then probably you want to be looking to go Garen in this game. He does really well into the top jungle. Now, if you're curious about how do I know what champion does well into their top and jungle, it all comes back to champ mastery. Again, you're not going to play every champ in the game. I hope you're not picking Garen in that situation as a first time Garen player just because it looks good. You have your champion pool example that you understand, you know the strengths and weaknesses of your champion, and then you pick the one that makes the most sense into their top jungle. And if you've played enough of your champion, you'll know what feels good. If you are a Jax player, you'll know versing Zyra jungle or Lilia feels very depressing, and you'll know versing Viego or Graves feels like a great time, even if your matchup sucks. So it all comes back to your champion mastery. It's important for you to go through, if you're not sure, the list of jungle champions, the list of mid-AD carry champions, and see what ones you kind of like versing, which ones you don't like, and get a good read on where your champion fits. Now, one thing I didn't really touch on yet is the carries, the mid and AD carry champions. So let's say your champion pool, because we don't play every champion, you don't really have a great pick into their jungle. Let's just say you don't have one in your pool, you can pick champions that do well into their carries. So an easy example is, for our first example before, where we saw the Camille, let's say you don't play a champion that does super well into Viego or Vi or anything like that, but you see they go Samira. If they go champ like Samira, a champion like Kai'Sa, you could slam Renekton. Renekton's going to do really well into those close range diving AD carries, and you win the top matchup also, where if you pick Renekton that game and they had like Zyra Khan or something, you're not really going to be as impactful. Now, for another example would be a champion like Camille. Your matchup might be a decent matchup for Camille, might not do that well into their jungler, but you see they've got like a Zeri or like a LeBlanc. Camille, if you have that champ mastery, you know, loves to ruin those hypermobile champions' day, so that's something you can keep in mind as well. If you don't have a great answer to their jungle and their top, try to look at an answer to their top and the mid AD carry champions as well. Now for our blind pick example, so again, making sure you're always trying to pick as late in the draft as possible. If for whatever reason your support declines your swap because they want to pick Rell into Alistar that game, not Alistar into Rell, then there's nothing you can really do about it. You just accept reality, lock in, and pick the champion based on what you already see, even if it's only 2 or 3 champions. But let's assuming we're picking later on in a lot of these situations, but I will give one where we don't really see the jungle. So for our champion pool, I'm just going to give us a random champion pool based on popular champions. Let's say we have access to Camille, Darius, Olaf, Malphite, and Mordekaiser. We'll chuck him in as well. So this is going to be our pool for these examples. Let's say you're blind picking and you see their jungle mid. So we see Xin Zhao and Sylas. In that situation, Darius out of our 5 options are going to be the best. The reason for that is even if you had to verse a Quinn or something top, you're playing Darius into Xin Zhao, Sylas, 2 melee champions that have to dive in. It's going to be very easy for you to stacking targets to get a reset off and be extremely impactful in the later stages of that game, even if you go down 20-30 CS in lane. Now, another example, let's say we see Kayn and LeBlanc. We see hypermobile, annoying assassin jungles out of our option. We probably don't want to be playing Olaf or Darius. In that case, Camille is going to outperform. Even if you have to verse a tough matchup like Renekton, you're still going to really nullify what Kayn and LeBlanc want to do in those fights, so your impact is going to be high. And for our final example, let's say our support declined us, so he can get his 500 Nautilus game down. We see Galio and Ashe. We just see them mid AD carry. We don't see jungle top yet. In that case, Olaf is going to be amazing. Olaf is going to completely 1v9 in that comp. It actually doesn't matter what they pick top jungle, more or less, because you're going to do so well into their carries, but especially if they do go a jungle melee champion, like a Sylas or like a Vine that has to come into you, you're going to have a great time. So again, picking as late as possible really is going to help you have the most impact in the game, but even seeing 2 or 3 champions and kind of understanding where your champion does well, what type of champions you like, what type of champions you don't like, can help you increase your impact. Now, even though I touched on champion mastery being the main way to know which champions you want to verse and which champions you don't, because I just like you all so damn much, I've created a cheat code here, 2 tier lists so you can use as a guide, maybe place your champions on them, and know when one champ's going to be more impactful than the other. So for example, at the top, the tank busters, if you're blind picking Gwen or Olaf, and all you see is that tank jungle like a Rammus or like a Sejuani, you're going to have a pretty good time compared to versing different classes like Kindred or like Kha'Zix or anything like that. Keeping in mind, however, some champions like to verse multiple classes, so if you're Darius and you're up against Xin Zhao or Nunu, you're pretty happy into both. This is just a rough outline. Now, another thing to keep in mind as well, not all champions are weighted equally. So for Jax into Jarvan, you're probably going to 1v9 the game. Jax into Lee Sin is not as good, but you'd still rather verse any single champion in the bruiser category than playing Jax into like a Lilia or like an Evelynn, so it's still going to be impactful nonetheless. And for range champions, either outrange them, so champions like Jace or champions like Gangplank, or hard engage onto them with Malphite, and of course you can imagine Rengar into like a Graves or like an Ivern is going to do a lot better than a champion that can lock him down. And for assassin junglers, champions that can either match their mobility and lock them in place, like Camille or Riven, or champions that just disengage or just straight up won't get assassinated, a Kiana jungle is not going to kill a Mundo anytime soon. And for our second tier list, this is champions that you want to be picking based on their carry, so you can kind of see if they have a mobile backline, you're going to have a great job on champions like Olaf, champions like Dr. Mundo, champions like Ambessa would do great into like a Jhin, Jinx, champions like Hui in mid lane, compared to others, champions like Darius, who mainly want to be countering their dive, mainly want to be playing that front to back, and making it hard for the enemy divers to come onto you. Again, not all weighted equally. If you're playing a champion like Jax into mobility champions, like an Ahri, it's not going to be as good compared to versing Ezreal and Lucian, so it really just depends. That part will come to champ mastery. And mobility counters, you can see champs that lock them down, so Maokai just flying after the LeBlanc, the funniest scene of all time. Cassante most mobile champions, keep in mind, do lower damage than straight just DPS champions. So Cassante into like an Israel or a Lucian, he's not going to die in that game until like 5 items. So you can kind of see the rough outline there. Moving on to dodging. When should we be using our dodge in champ select? And no, the answer is not every time we have to versus a Lowy or Heimerdinger. We can beat those guys. There are two main important variables for you to keep in mind. The first one being, does your champion have low value in the game? So if you're playing Jax into Gragas Poppy or Olaf into Jace and Lilia, probably you're not going to be that impactful in that game unless the enemy top just spoon feeds you 10 kills, which is why I almost never dodge on red side, because I see the enemy team comp, I can pick a champion that does have high value. Now the second point to keep in mind is, does your team comp have too much high variance champions? So I'll show a tier list of exactly what I mean. These are champions that have to perform well in the game to be useful. If you have a Nidalee or a Kayn, and they have champions like Vi or Sejuani, who are always useful, even if they're 0-5, even if they're 5-0, they always have high impact. Or if they have a Rel and you have a Senna has to really hard outperform the Rel for it to be useful. So bringing it back to that example, if we're Jax in a bad matchup, and the comp's not that good for us, maybe they have Hui as well, a bunch of those champions, and we've got Shaco, Yasuo mid jungle, Blitzcrank Kalista bottom, probably that chance of winning that game is very low. It's very team reliant, because the champions on your team have to perform extremely well to win, and that's not a consistent strategy in solo queue, relying on your team. So if your champion has low value in the game, and you have high variance, a dodge could be good. If your champion has high value, even if you have some weird champions on your team, you have a lot of impact in that game, so it's not worth dodging in that case.